The piercing sound of the jackhammer echoed through the Oak Valley residential neighborhood in Arlington, Virginia, as Eric Peterson watched in astonishment from the window of his makeshift office. It wasn't the first time that construction equipment had mysteriously appeared on his property in recent weeks, but now he had concrete evidence of what was really going on. The screen of his laptop displayed crystal-clear images captured by the security camera installed discreetly under the eaves of the roof. Dorothy Williams, the president of the Oak Valley Homeowners Association (HOA), was clearly in a suspicious conversation with Marcus Stanley, owner of Stanley Demolitions, in the parking lot of the community club. The footage showed Dorothy handing over a brown envelope and repeatedly pointing to a plant that appeared to be from Eric's property. "I need it to look like an accident," Dorothy said on the video, her authoritative voice picked up clearly by the directional microphone. "Peterson has been a thorn in our side since he moved here. He questions too much documents too much, and is inspiring other residents to challenge our authority." Eric ran a hand through his gray hair, trying to process the magnitude of the conspiracy he had uncovered. At 45, after 2 decades as an investigative journalist, he had developed a sixth sense for spotting wrongdoing. But not even his experience had prepared him for the level of corruption he had found in Oak Valley. It had all started 3 months earlier, when Eric had refused to remove the small herb garden he kept in his front yard. The HOA claimed the garden violated the neighborhood's aesthetic guidelines, but Eric knew there was nothing in the bylaws prohibiting well-maintained gardens. His refusal to budge had triggered a series of suspicious accidents on his property. The sound of footsteps on the gravel caught his attention. Through the window, Eric observed Kevin Murphy, the foreman of Stanley Demolitions, sneaking up to the irrigation system. With his cell phone camera in hand, Eric documented as Murphy deliberately damaged the connections, causing a leak that would soon form a sizable puddle. Eric immediately sent the evidence to Laura Bennett, a private investigator he had hired the week before. Laura, a former Arlington police detective with 15 years of experience, had already uncovered troubling connections between Dorothy Williams and other HOA board members. "Eric, you need to see this," said Laura's message that had just arrived. Attached was a document detailing suspicious bank transfers between the personal accounts of Dorothy and 3 other board members. The amounts coincided with the dates of similar accidents at other properties in the neighborhood. The phone rang, displaying the number of Richard Cooper, her lawyer. "Eric, I've analyzed the evidence you sent. We have a solid case of conspiracy and criminal damage to property. But we need to act fast before they realize they've been found out." Eric watched through the window as Dorothy Williams walked haughtily down the sidewalk, stopping to examine the leak in her garden with satisfaction. Her aristocratic face showed no remorse as she typed something into her tablet, probably yet another breach notification. That evening, Eric organized a secret meeting at his home with other homeowners who had suffered similar harassment from the HOA. Amanda Rodriguez, an architect who had her solar energy project blocked without justification, Michael Chen, whose request to install an accessibility ramp for his elderly mother had been repeatedly denied, and Jennifer Foster, who faced absurd fines for painting her door the wrong color. "We can't let them keep abusing their power like this," Amanda declared, her voice shaking with indignation. "They are destroying our community in the name of baseless authoritarian control." Laura Bennett arrived shortly afterwards, carrying more incriminating documents. "I discovered that Dorothy and her group have connections with a real estate management company that is buying up properties in the neighborhood at prices far below market. All the houses they bought belong to people who were practically forced to move because of the HOA's harassment." Eric felt his stomach turn as he realized the extent of the conspiracy. It wasn't just about control and power, it was an elaborate real estate speculation scheme disguised as community governance. Tomorrow, I'm going to present all the evidence to the public prosecutor's office, announced Richard Cooper, who had also joined the meeting. But we need to be prepared for retaliation. Dorothy Williams is not going to give up the control she has built up easily. While the others discussed legal strategies, Eric watched through the window as the lights went on in Dorothy's house across the street. A silhouette moved behind the curtains, and for a moment, he was sure she was watching him too, planning her next move in the silent war that had taken hold in Oak Valley. What had begun as a simple dispute over an herb garden had turned into a battle for the future of an entire community. Eric knew that the next few weeks would be decisive, and that Dorothy Williams would not be his only concern. The web of corruption she had woven was extensive, and dismantling it would require more than just evidence. It would require courage and determination from everyone involved. The night wore on, and with it grew Eric's determination to expose the truth, not just for his property, but for all those who had fallen victim to tyranny disguised as order and conformity in Oak Valley. The battle was just beginning, and he knew that the worst was yet to come. Laura Bennett parked her Subaru discreetly a block away from Stanley Demolitions' headquarters, adjusting the hidden camera in her Blazer. After a week of investigating Marcus Stanley, she had uncovered a disturbing pattern of accidents at properties throughout Arlington, all connected to disputes with local HOAs. "Can you hear me, Eric?" she whispered into the microphone disguised as a brooch. Recording started. "I'm coming in." "Loud and clear," Eric replied through the small earpiece in his ear. "Be careful. Kevin Murphy is in the office. Today, according to our sources." Laura crossed the parking lot with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Her cover was convincing an inspector from the building department carrying out a routine audit. The receptionist barely looked up when she presented her fake credentials, meticulously drawn up by Richard Cooper. As she walked through the corridors, discreetly photographing documents and computers, Laura caught a conversation coming from Marcus Stanley's office. The door was ajar, allowing her to position herself strategically. "Dorothy is getting impatient," said Marcus, his voice tense. "She wants more significant results on the Peterson estate. The little sabotages aren't having any effect." "That damn journalist is smarter than we thought," replied Kevin Murphy. "He's installed cameras all over the property. I can barely get close without being filmed." Laura recorded every word, her heart racing, as the conversation took a darker turn. "Dorothy mentioned that it might be time for more definitive measures," Marcus continued. "She has connections in the fire department. An accidental short circuit would be convincing enough." In his office, Eric felt a chill as he heard the words through the transmission. He immediately began backing up all the evidence on secure servers, aware that the situation was escalating dangerously. Laura continued her forensic inspection, collecting more evidence. In a poorly sealed drawer, she found copies of contracts between Stanley Demolitions and several HOAs in the region, all with suspicious clauses and inflated values. More importantly, she discovered documents linking the company to a series of accidental fires in disputed properties. As she left the building, Laura noticed a familiar car in the parking lot, Dorothy Williams' black Mercedes. She quickly hid behind a van as Dorothy emerged from the vehicle, accompanied by two HOA board members Eric recognized from the broadcast, Gerald Thompson and Patricia Morgan. "We need to get rid of him before the next board meeting," Dorothy said, her voice laden with urgency. "If those allegations of corruption come to light, our whole scheme falls apart." Patricia Morgan, a former real estate broker, known for her aggressive tactics, nodded emphatically. "The real estate market is too hot for us to miss this opportunity. We already have buyers interested in several properties in the neighborhood." Laura recorded the entire conversation, her stomach churning, as she realized that the conspiracy was even bigger than they had suspected. It wasn't just about control and power. It was an elaborate real estate speculation scheme that involved forcing homeowners to sell their houses for low prices. Back in the car, Laura contacted Richard Cooper. "Dick, we have to act fast. They're planning something big against Eric, possibly in the next 48 hours. Get everyone together at my house tonight," Richard replied. "I've got some interesting documents at the registry office that we need to discuss." Meanwhile, Eric received an unexpected visitor. Amanda Rodriguez knocked on his door, panting and visibly upset. "I just got this," she said, handing over an official letter from the HOA. "They are threatening foreclosure on my house for alleged accumulated violations. The fines add up to over $50,000. Eric examined the documents, recognizing the same pattern of harassment that other residents had reported. "They're speeding up the process," he muttered. "We need to expose everything before more people lose their homes." That evening, the group met in Richard Cooper's office. Laura presented the evidence she had collected, including audio recordings and photographed documents. Michael Chen brought records of suspicious transactions that his wife, a local bank employee, had identified. "The scheme is more sophisticated than we imagined," Richard explained, spreading out documents on his desk. "Dorothy Williams and her associates set up a network of front companies to buy up undervalued properties. Once they've forced the residents to sell, they resell for extraordinary profits." Jennifer Foster, who used to work in the urban planning department, added a crucial piece of information. "I found out that there are plans to expand the metro to our area. Property values are going to skyrocket in the next few years. They know this and are positioning themselves to profit." Eric realized that they finally had all the pieces of the puzzle. "We need to act before they try something more drastic," he said, thinking back to the conversation about accidental fires that Laura had recorded. Richard nodded gravely. "I've prepared a detailed report for the FBI and the Attorney General's office, but we need to protect you while the case is investigated. Dorothy Williams has powerful connections and won't hesitate to use every resource at her disposal." While the group was discussing protection strategies, Eric received a disturbing message on his cell phone. It was a photo of his teenage daughter leaving school, followed by a simple text. It would be a shame if something happened to her. The explicit threat made his blood run cold. The war with the HOA had just become much more personal, and Eric knew there was no turning back. The next phase of the confrontation would require more than just evidence and lawsuits. It would require the courage to stand up to people willing to do anything to maintain their power and illicit profits. The threatening photograph of Eric's daughter was still burning in his mind when Laura Bennett knocked on his door at 6 a.m. the next morning. Her normally composed face revealed an unusual urgency. "We need to act now," she said, entering quickly. "My contacts at the fire department have confirmed Dorothy has submitted an anonymous complaint about alleged electrical violations at your home. The inspection is scheduled for this afternoon." Eric ran a hand over his tired face. He hadn't slept since receiving the threat. "I've already arranged for Claire to stay at my sister's house in Baltimore. But this has to stop, Laura. They've crossed every line." Laura's phone vibrated. It was Jennifer Foster from the City Planning Department. "You need to see this. I just found approvals issued for major real estate developments in Oak Valley. All the properties the HOA is pushing for are on the project map." Richard Cooper arrived minutes later with Michael Chen. The lawyer was carrying a thick folder with newly discovered documents. "We managed to trace the money," Michael announced, spreading bank statements across the kitchen table. "Dorothy set up a network of shell companies to launder the money from the HOA fines. The amounts are astronomical." "And there's more," added Richard. "We discovered that Marcus Stanley doesn't just own the demolition company. He's a hidden partner in 3 of the real estate development companies that have bought properties in Oak Valley in the last 6 months. Amanda Rodriguez hurried in her laptop open. As an architect, she had analyzed the approved projects. It's a forced gentrification scheme. They're systematically evicting original owners to replace the houses with luxury condominiums. The potential value is in the hundreds of millions. Eric connected his laptop to the TV in the living room, displaying a digital map of Oak Valley. Red dots marked all the properties that had suffered accidents or were facing pressure from the HOA. The pattern was undeniable. They formed a perfect corridor for the planned development. "But why the rush now?" asked Laura, studying the map. The answer came from Jennifer, who had designed confidential urban planning documents. The subway expansion is just the tip of the iceberg. The county has approved a new commercial district that will transform this entire area. Dorothy and her associates are racing to acquire as much property as possible before the news gets out. An alert sounded on Eric's cell phone. His security. Cameras had detected movement. Kevin Murphy and 2 unknown men were examining the outside power box of his house. "They won't wait for the inspection," said Laura, already calling her police contacts. "They're preparing the accident now." Richard took over. "Michael, get your wife at the bank. We need to freeze all suspicious accounts immediately." Jennifer, hand over the urban planning documents to the federal prosecutor. Amanda, prepare a technical dossier on the irregularities in the project approvals. Eric watched the monitors as the men manipulated something in the power box. "We can't let them destroy any more evidence," he said, picking up his camera. "Wait," Laura stopped him. "I have a better idea. Dorothy doesn't know yet that we've uncovered the whole scheme. We can use that to our advantage." She quickly outlined a plan. Within minutes, Richard was on the phone with Dorothy Williams requesting an emergency meeting of the HOA board. "We need to discuss a proposed settlement on Mr. Peterson's property," he said, his professional voice masking the strategy at hand. Meanwhile, Laura was coordinating with federal agents who had been investigating real estate fraud in the area for months. The connection between the Oak Valley HOA and the larger schemes was exactly what they needed to dismantle the entire operation. Amanda worked frantically at her laptop, compiling years of building code violations and irregular approvals. "I found something," she said suddenly. "The signatures on the approval documents, 3 of them are forgeries. I have the originals for comparison." Michael returned with news from the bank. "We did it. The main accounts have been frozen. On suspicion of money laundering. Dorothy tried to make a large transfer 10 minutes ago, and it was blocked." Eric's phone rang. It was Dorothy Williams. "Mr. Peterson." Her voice was controlled, but he could detect a tremor of concern. "I've just been informed of your desire to resolve our differences. The board is willing to meet tonight." "Excellent," replied Eric, exchanging glances with Laura. "I'm sure we can reach an agreement that benefits all parties involved." As soon as she hung up, Laura showed a message on her cell phone. "The federal agents will be in position. As soon as we have the taped confessions, they'll make the arrests." Richard adjusted his tie. "Remember, we need them to admit to the scheme voluntarily. Stay calm and stick to the plan." Eric took one last look at the threatening photo of his daughter before deleting it. Tonight, Dorothy Williams will learn that not everyone can be bullied or bought. The group spent the next few hours refining their strategy, aware that they would only have one chance to expose the entire conspiracy. The HOA board meeting, scheduled for 7 p.m., would be the decisive moment in their fight for justice. As the sun set over Oak Valley, Eric watched Kevin Murphy and his men finally leave his property. In a few hours, everything would change in that community that Dorothy Williams believed she controlled with an iron fist. The real battle was about to begin, and this time they had all their cards up their sleeves. The HOA meeting room was strategically prepared for the evening. Eric and Laura had arrived an hour earlier, discreetly installing microphones and cameras at key points in the room. Richard Cooper reviewed the documents one last time, while Amanda and Jennifer positioned themselves in predetermined locations in the building. "Federal team in position," whispered Laura into her communicator, looking through the window at the undercover cars parked nearby. "Agents awaiting our signal." At 7 p.m., sharp Dorothy Williams entered the room with her usual imperial bearing, followed by Marcus Stanley and other board members. Kevin Murphy stood near the door, his presence a clear attempt at intimidation. "Mr. Peterson." Dorothy began, her artificial smile not reaching her eyes. "We're pleased that you've finally decided to be reasonable." Eric kept his expression neutral, as Richard presented a seemingly tempting proposal Eric would sell. His property for well below market value in exchange for an end to the investigations into alleged violations. "Considering the structural problems recently discovered on your property." Dorothy emphasized the word with malice. "This is a more than generous offer." "Structural problems?" Eric feigned concern. "Like the ones that mysteriously appeared in the Hendersons' house before they were forced to sell." The mention of the Hendersons caused a visible tension in the room. Patricia Morgan nervously adjusted her pearl necklace, while Gerald Thompson cast a warning glance at Dorothy. "Mr. Peterson," Marcus Stanley intervened, his voice calculatingly soft. "Accidents happen in old properties. Fortunately, we have interested buyers who don't mind little mishaps." Laura, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. "Buyers like Vertex Development. Interesting how they always show up right after the accidents, isn't it?" Dorothy narrowed her eyes, studying Laura with new suspicion. "I don't see how that's relevant to our discussion." "Oh, but it is extremely relevant," Richard interjected, sliding some papers across the table. "Especially considering that Vertex Development is just one of several shell companies registered in your nephew's name, Mrs. Williams." Dorothy's face paled slightly, but she kept her composure. "Are you implying something, Mr. Cooper?" "We're not implying anything," Eric replied calmly. "Just connecting the dots, like the regular deposits into offshore accounts coinciding with every problem property sold in Oak Valley." Kevin Murphy moved uncomfortably close to the door, his hand unconsciously touching the pocket where Eric knew the envelope. "With his last installment of payment was—" "This is ridiculous," Dorothy declared, standing up. "I'm not going to stand here and listen to unfounded accusations." "Unfounded accusations?" Laura projected the documents Jennifer had discovered onto the screen in the living room. "So how do you explain these approvals issued for projects exactly in the areas where the accidents occurred? Projects, by the way, that were approved before the properties were even acquired." Marcus Stanley snorted nervously. "Dorothy, maybe we should—" "Shut up," she hissed, but it was too late. Panic was beginning to spread among those present. "We know about the subway expansion plan," Eric continued, keeping his voice calm. "About the secretly approved commercial projects. About how you've been using the HOA to force homeowners to sell before property values skyrocket." Patricia Morgan was the first to break down. "It was Dorothy's idea. She said no one would find out that the documents were all protected." "You idiot!" Dorothy exploded. 15 years of building this plan, and you— 15 years of fraud, you mean," Laura interrupted, making a discreet sign to the door. Federal agents began to quietly enter the room. 15 years of forcing people from their homes, destroying lives to profit from inside information. Kevin Murphy tried to escape, but was quickly detained. From his pocket, fell the envelope containing cash, yet more evidence for the pile that was accumulating. Dorothy Williams, a federal agent, approached badge in hand. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, real estate fraud, extortion, and insider trading." As the agents led the board members out, Dorothy cast one last venomous glance at Eric. "You don't understand. Oak Valley needed order control. These people didn't know what was best for the community." "No, Dorothy," Eric replied. "You're the one who never understood. Community is not built on fear and intimidation. It's built with respect and dignity." Over the next few hours, federal agents searched offices and homes, uncovering more evidence of the criminal scheme. Amanda and Jennifer worked with the authorities, identifying all the affected properties and the real owners of the shell companies. Michael Chen arrived with more bank documents proving how money from HOA fines had been diverted into personal accounts and irregular investments. The scheme was even bigger than they imagined, affecting communities in 3 different states. As he watched the last police cars leave Oak Valley, Eric felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. The battle was won, but he knew that the war for the soul of the community had only just begun. There was a lot of work ahead to rebuild trust between neighbors and establish truly democratic governance. Laura touched his shoulder gently. "You should call Claire, tell her everything's fine now." Eric smiled, picking up the phone. His daughter could come home, and Oak Valley could finally begin to heal. The courtroom of the federal court was packed that Thursday morning. Eric Peterson watched Dorothy Williams now, without her usual air of superiority, sitting in the dock, next to her co-conspirators. 3 months had passed since the night of the arrests in Oak Valley, and the trial was finally coming to an end. "Your Honor," the federal prosecutor concluded his argument, "the evidence is irrefutable. For 15 years, the defendants operated a sophisticated scheme of extortion and real estate fraud using the HOA as a front for their criminal activities. Dozens of families lost their homes, their savings, and their dignity." Laura Bennett, sitting next to Eric, took detailed notes. As a key witness, her testimony had been crucial in connecting all the evidence. The bank records, the recordings, the forged documents, it all formed a devastating picture of systematic corruption. "The prosecution is asking for the maximum sentence," the prosecutor continued, "not just for the financial crimes, but for the deliberate destruction of the social fabric of an entire community." Richard Cooper leaned towards Eric, whispering, "I've prepared the documents for the civil class action. As soon as I finish with the criminal case, we'll go after their personal assets." Judge Elizabeth Monroe, known for her firm stance against white-collar crime, adjusted her glasses as she examined the documents one last time. The silence in the room was palpable. "Dorothy Williams!" Her voice rang out clear and stern. "Stand up!" Dorothy rose slowly, her expression a mask of studied indifference. But Eric, who was watching her intently, noticed the slight tremor in her hands. This court rarely sees a case that combines such criminal sophistication with such disregard for human dignity, the judge declared. "You didn't just steal property and money, you stole hundreds of people's sense of community and security." The sentence was ruthless: 20 years in federal prison for Dorothy, 15 for Marcus Stanley, and varying sentences for the other members of the scheme. Kevin Murphy, who had made a plea bargain, received 5 years with the possibility of parole. As the officers led the convicts away, Eric thought about how Oak Valley had changed in recent months. The community, initially fragmented by fear and mistrust, was slowly reconnecting. Amanda Rodriguez now led the HOA's transition committee, working to establish a new transparent and democratic governance structure. Michael Chen had organized a legal aid fund to help former victims recover their property. Eric Laura touched, his arm indicating Jennifer Foster, who was approaching with a beaming smile. "We got the go-ahead," Jennifer exclaimed, showing official documents. "The City Council has agreed to review all the irregularly approved projects. The displaced families will have priority to buy back their old properties at their original values." City. It was a significant victory, but Eric knew that the work was far from over. That evening, a community meeting was called at the Oak Valley Recreation Center. The hall, once the scene of so many authoritarian decisions, was now buzzing with positive energy and hope. "We need to completely reimagine the HOA concept," Amanda presented to the residents. "Not as an instrument of control, but as a tool to strengthen our community." The proposals included rotating committees, regular independent audits, and a participatory decision-making system for important issues. Most importantly, it established a strict code of ethics and mechanisms to protect against abuses of power. Claire, Eric's daughter, now safe at home, had become an enthusiastic supporter of the new Oak Valley. Together with other young people from the neighborhood, she had created a community gardening program, an ironic reference to the herb garden that had started the whole saga. "Dad," she said, as they planted new shrubs in the community garden, "I think I finally understand why you never gave up fighting." Eric smiled, remembering the darkest moments of the battle. Sometimes we need to face evil not just for ourselves, but for all those who will come after. Seat. Laura, who had become a constant presence in the community, was now coordinating a Citizen Watch program teaching residents how to identify and document abusive practices in homeowners' associations. "We're creating a model," she explained during a training session. "Other communities are already coming to us to learn how to protect themselves from similar situations." Richard Cooper, pleased with the progress, presented a final report on financial restitutions. The assets confiscated from Dorothy and her accomplices would be converted into a fund for reparations to victims and community improvements. "Oak Valley can become a national example," he declared, "of how a community can recover from corruption and build something better." As the sun set over the neighborhood's quiet streets, Eric watched groups of neighbors chatting on balconies, children playing in gardens and seniors strolling without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment. The battle against the tyranny of the HOA had transformed Oak Valley into something more than just a collection of houses. It had created a true community united not by fear, but by the collective courage to fight for what is right. Sometimes, Eric thought, gazing at his now flourishing herb garden, it takes something breaking down completely to be rebuilt the right way. Oak Valley's legacy would no longer be a story of oppression and greed, but a testament to the power of peaceful resistance and the strength of community unity. The real victory was not just in the punishment of the guilty, but in the rebirth of a neighborhood that had finally learned the true meaning of home.